Everybody, my name is Rob Phelan, also known as the FI Educator Online, and today we are talking about salaries and how much you get paid. And that's not usually a conversation that we have with other people. It's one of those ones like money in general. You guys know it. We're in a personal finance class, but talking to someone else who you don't really know that well, like they're not your best friend, maybe they're not your parent, though my parents still won't tell me how much they make. But asking them like, hey, how much do you make, or what did you get paid starting off in this job that I'm applying for? Like, those are hard questions for us to ask. We often feel really uncomfortable doing that. We're talking today to Hannah Williams from Salary Transparency. She's the co-founder of this really, really cool channel where she literally goes up to people and asks that awkward question all the time, like, how much do you make? And by doing that, she's created this place where people can actually see what others are making. We call that salary transparency. So Hannah, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Literally, the reason I started it was because I was hoping kids that were going into the workforce would see it and feel inspired to have these conversations and to also do the research about how much they can expect to make in their careers. So I feel like this is a really great audience to talk to and a really important topic.
For sure. Because I mean, my students, exact same thing. And they're having conversations all the time like, hey, I'm applying for these jobs. Like, where should I apply? What's the salary or what's the wage typically? Because most jobs at high school level, you're talking about an hourly
Right.
wage versus an annual salary. But
Mhm.
it's a common question, and nobody seems to know the answer or how to go find that answer. And that's two things that we really want to dive into today is how much should I be getting paid? How do I find out what a job pays? And what do I do if I'm not getting paid enough? So
Yeah.
you got you guys who have the piece of paper in front of you. So this is our student activity document. You can find the link for that at the bottom of the screen, teachers, if you want to use it. But the first question is like, are you working right now? If so, what are you getting paid? Do you think it's enough? How do you think you are getting paid compared to the other people in your job? Those are some questions I want you to think about as you go forward here. All right, so Hannah, where should we start? What do you think?
I think it would be a really great opportunity for me to talk about how much I make since everyone's going to be filling out this worksheet and saying how much they make. I'll be
Sure.
transparent myself. Yeah. So I'm the CEO and founder of Salary Transparency. That's my full time job. I run this channel 9 to 5. It's a 7 day a week, 24/7 business. The internet never stops. But I make $150,000 a year doing this. So it is definitely possible to make six figures working in social media. My business made over $1 million last year. So technically, my business has made 1 million, but I pay myself six figures. So if you want to look at it, whether you look at the business revenue or my take home salary, I feel very well compensated and I'm able to live a great life in the Northern Virginia area on that pay.
Yeah, and I love that you're just like very quickly able to say like, okay, this is what my business made, this is what I made. And those are very different numbers. And I hope you all realize that when we talk about businesses and their revenue, there's all sorts of costs that have to come out before it filters down to be your take home pay. I guess in the spirit of transparency, I'm a full-time high school teacher. I make about 91,000 in Maryland, which for teachers, that's a pretty high salary, but I also live in one of the highest cost of living states in the US. So it usually ends up balancing out. And that's why it's so important to consider where you live, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That I think we'll get into that, but there are some really important factors to be aware of that will determine whether or not you can make more or less in certain career fields. So we'll get into that though. But location is clearly one of them for you.
Yes. All right. So you started this off. Why did you do it? Like, what made you think, like, you know what? This is what people need. They need they need me walking up to them on the street, asking them how much they make, and I'm going to post that online, and somehow that's going to turn into a business. Like, what was that
hmm
about, and why'd you do it?
Yeah, I created Salary Transparency because honestly, I needed this information. Before becoming a social media influencer, I used to be a government data analyst. So I supported government data contracts. I worked in the DC metro area full time. I was making $90,000 a year I think I was 23 years old, fresh out of college. And I was making more money than I'd ever imagined I would in my life. Like when they made me that offer for 90K, I said yes without any hesitation because it was so much money. I felt really proud. I felt like I was going to be well compensated. And within a couple months on the job, I actually found out that I was underpaid according to the market by about $25,000. And when you get that paycheck and you realize you could be making $25,000 more, it really eats at you. Like it hurts to be undercompensated. It feels a little bit personal, but it affects your bottom line and your budget at the end of the day. So it's a big deal. And when you find out that you're undercompensated, it's very difficult to be well compensated. You either have to ask for a raise at that company and ask for a lot more, which is what I did. And they said no to me. They said, no, we're not going to give you a $25,000 raise overnight. So I had to go look for a new job. And luckily, I was able to get a job making 25K more. So I validated that I was underpaid. I started making what I knew that I was worth. But finding out how much I should be making was something that just was not available to me. This was 2021, 2022, and pay transparency was still incredibly taboo. Pay secrecy was the norm. Companies were not listing pay ranges in job listings. So no one really had any idea how much they should be making. And we definitely were not talking about it. So when I got this raise and I realized, there's just no transparency out there. How am I supposed to find out? How am I supposed to know? I realized there was just a huge lack of information out there. And the only way to fill that gap was to talk to people about how much they make. So I had seen some people on TikTok with street interviews asking people some crazy questions. And I was like, I think I could ask people how much they make. And when I started it, I didn't think it would become the global phenomenon that it is today. I didn't think it would become my full-time job. I was hoping that I would inspire maybe some students just like you all watching, or anybody watching, to do the research, to have the conversation, or to feel more inclined towards pay transparency than secrecy because you see the value of it. And it met its goal. It definitely achieved what I hoped it would, more than I would have ever expected. And I ended up quitting my job as a government data contractor 3 weeks after our first video because there were so many companies that wanted to partner with us and help us amplify this message. And so I've been doing it full time ever since for the past 3 years.
That's awesome. And I love that. You find a niche, a hole in the market, something that people want, you create content around it, and you test it. I mean, you still had a job while you tested it. You saw, you know what, actually people want this. You saw companies coming out of the woodwork to be like, we want to work with you. And that's when you made the leap into like, okay, this is what I'm going to do full time.
Mm-hmm.
So for any of you all watching, you're like, you know what, I really want to do this social media thing and I want to give it a go as a full-time gig. Start testing, start recording, start posting, and see, is there a demand for the content that you're making?
Mm-hmm.
I would say your story is probably a little fast compared to what some other
Yes.
social media content creators would be. I'd say most are probably posting for close to a year before they really start to tell, like, is there traction in this or not? Am I going to go anywhere with this?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it can be done, and
Absolutely.
it's a really cool opportunity out there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think what's really important is if you want to go into social media, the way to really skyrocket is to do something that hasn't been done before or hasn't been done well before. When we
Mhm.
started Salary Transparent Street, asking people how much they made on the street just was not a normal thing to see. So now there's like a lot of copycat accounts. So you can't like skyrocket off of that today with a brand new account, but tons of ideas out there. And I definitely recommend testing.
All right. So one thing you brought up, which is normally counter to the advice that we normally give, is to compare yourselves to others. Because we
Mm,
know in personal finance, the comparison trap is a really, a quick street to overspending, to feeling bad about your situation. There's always someone out there who has more than you, makes more than you, looks like they have more than you. And so we always caution people, like, don't compare yourselves to others. Don't look at social media to say like, this is how I should measure myself. But you did with salary, and it actually did have that impact of, you thought you were doing great, things were good, but comparison was the thief of joy in that moment, because you're like, well, actually, no, I'm not making as much as I should. So
mhm.
where's the line there between like you were happy in the beginning and then you became unhappy because you dug into it?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point that comparison can be the thief of joy. But I'm glad we're talking about this because when it comes to salary and pay and how much we make our compensation, there are so many important factors to be aware of that will make sure whether or not you're comparing yourself accurately or inaccurately. For example, sometimes I'll do videos and I'll post, a software engineer in California making $150,000 a year. And we'll get a comment from somebody who says, I'm a data engineer in Rhode Island and I don't make nearly that much. And that's a great example of comparison is the thief of joy, because There are so many factors between these two people that can clearly demonstrate why there is a pay discrepancy. For example, if you work in an industry, like a more tech relevant industry as a software engineer, you're more likely to make more versus if you are a software engineer and you work in marketing, you're less likely to make as much because your industry is less relevant. There's also really simple comparisons like years of experience. If you have more years of experience than somebody else, if you have more hard skills versus soft skills than somebody else, if you have higher education, if you went and got a master's degree in that discipline and the other person just has a bachelor's degree, of course the person with the master's degree will make more. And location, like we mentioned earlier with your compensation, Rob, plays a big factor.
Mhm.
If you live in an area that is higher cost of living, like Maryland, Washington, D.C., New York, California, those are going to have higher pay rates for the exact same role than lower cost of living areas like Mississippi or Tennessee. So it's really important not to just have a knee-jerk reaction when comparing yourself to another person with a similar job title. You need to investigate, and that's why having these conversations is so important, because you can get down to the nitty-gritty and figure out, what do they have that I'm missing? Or what is this factor that they are in that is making a difference in the pay? And you can learn from one another and help each other level up. But don't just immediately see someone making more and assume that you are not well compensated. I knew I was not well compensated because I was comparing myself to other data analysts working in government contracting in the DC metro area with similar education and similar skills. That is exactly where I should be comparing myself to. And I learned the hard way that I was very much underpaid.
Yeah, and I obviously, guys, I believe this 100%. I think it is so important to find out what it is that you should be making for the skills, qualification, experience, location, all the things. So you should be getting compensated fairly. We know that businesses at their core, mostly, unless they're a nonprofit, they exist to make a profit. It's not typically in a business's best interest to throw out the highest salary possible to you when you apply for a job. But I'm curious on your response here, Hannah. Do you think it's the responsibility of the employer to pay a fair wage, or is it the responsibility of the person applying for the job to really know what they should be asking for?
My hot take, I think it is the employer's responsibility to
Mhm.
pay a fair wage, simply because the only way that an employee would, walking into the situation, be really good at asking for what they're worth is if they are applying to be a negotiator. That is the only time that a worker going into a job interview would be expected to have the skills to negotiate fairly for their compensation. But everybody else, which is like 99% of workers, if you are a market analyst, if you are an operations engineer, any type of job, if you're a registered nurse, if you're an EMT, you do not learn negotiation in your training. So, how could it be expected that you are going to walk into this situation and have all the skills and tools you need to advocate for yourself? No, we should be expecting employers to pay a fair wage. And if they're not able to, they should be able to explain that. Of course, there's companies out there like startups, where pay should be a little bit higher, but they just don't have the capability. Nonprofits, charity work, a lot of these industries are just not able to pay a market rate, and they shouldn't be ashamed to explain that. A lot of times you'll get paid less for work that is more service oriented. But if it's not, you should be valuing your employees, and paying them fairly is the best way to do that.
Totally agree. But let's make sure that we are all now informed people who are going to go apply for jobs, and let's make sure that we're also doing our fair share, just in case the employer is not doing it 100% transparently.
Hmm.
You talked about job listings and
Yeah.
not showing salary. That's something that's shifting, right? Like, aren't
Yeah.
employers now kind of required to show, what do they have to put an exact salary, or do they have to give a range? Like, how does that work? What should we be looking for
Yeah.
in the job description?
It depends based on the state. So it's very important to know what your state's pay transparency laws are. And a pay transparency law is pretty straightforward. It just means that the state requires certain companies, and each law is different. So I wish I had like a one size fits all answer, but some states require companies with 5 or more employees. Some of them require companies that have 100 or more employees. So know what the criteria is for what companies would qualify for this. But if they they qualify, the state requires that they list a pay range. And sometimes it goes as far as not just listing a pay range in the external job listing, it also requires internal pay transparency, meaning that if you work for that company and they meet the criteria, they have like 5 or more employees or 100 or more employees, you can ask your manager how much your role's pay range should be, how much the role you're interested in transferring to within that company, what the pay range would be. If you're up for a promotion, how much would that pay range be? It makes it their responsibility to share that information instead of you needing to ask for it. You may still need to ask for it because what we are seeing is companies are just not abiding by the law. They may have not heard about it yet. There may not be as much awareness, but it is the law. So as workers, we need to know what our state's pay transparency laws are so that when we're applying and we see there's no pay listing on this job, and I know that they meet the criteria, let me reach out and ask for the pay range. And they legally are supposed to give it to you. If they don't want to do that, you can also report them to your state's labor department if you want to go that far, which we should, because companies should be obeying the law. But a quick list of states that do have pay transparency laws, meaning that if you work in this state, the companies that are employing workers in that state should list pay ranges. So quick spitball: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Washington, D.C. All these states currently have active pay transparency laws, and there are many other states that have legislation in the works to pass this. So another quick little shout out: if you don't think it matters to vote, it absolutely does, because who you vote for determines whether or not they will vote for those laws. And we need these laws. They empower workers just like you.
Yeah, and those are the kind of laws that we need people to vote for, because they're not the ones that are just going to naturally make their way in there, because again, businesses don't necessarily want this. Like, it's something that hurts them pretty much, because they have to pay a fair wage then to everyone, and everyone knows what everyone else is making. So you end up with workers asking for more, new employees asking for more, and that's what we deserve. But as the employer, it's not necessarily in their best interest. So make sure you are voting as you become that old enough to vote and eligible to vote. Okay. So next up on our list of questions that we want to dive into is, like, as we're thinking about applying for a job. So, our audience, we're talking about high school students, we've got part-time jobs, maybe we've got some summer work or seasonal work. What should we be looking for when we are looking to apply for a job? So assuming that a job is listed, what should we be looking for in the job listing? Or if we want to work somewhere, how would you go about that?
Yeah. So number one, I'm going to look for the salary or the wage. I'm going to see what the wage range is, whether it's hourly or, by month. How are they paying? What is the structure that they are following? So I would look for that, but I would also look for, is it part-time? Is it full-time? What are the expectations of the role, and how is that going to fit your lifestyle and your expectations for the job? Do you want to work full-time? Do you want to work mornings? Do you want to work evenings? A lot of the time, looking for a career is not about what makes us passionate. It's actually about what suits our lifestyle. How do we work best? Do we want to work outside? Do we want to work in a cubicle inside? Everybody has their preference. So if I were you, before applying for a job, set that list, that criteria. What do you want out of a job in terms of, if you're going to be in this building or in this spot from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, what would you like to be doing? What would you not like to be doing? And then I would compare that list of that criteria to what the job is hiring for. Sadly, when we start out in our careers, a lot of us are going to have to take jobs that are not the perfect fit. And a lot of times you got to take those jobs as a leapfrog to get to the perfect fit. So don't get down on yourself if you're not finding exactly what meets your criteria and your list of what you would like. Make sure that you set a goal, though, to reach that in the future, and that the careers that you're leapfrogging to will make sure to get you there.
I love that you start with, the what you want, because I feel like so many students of mine, they look at the hourly rate, like, oh, this is a great hourly rate. They apply for it and they're like, wait, this requires me to work both days of the weekend, after school. Like, I've no life left after this. Same thing with summer jobs. Like, they can realize, oh, this is something that requires 5 days a week, and like, I didn't want to do that. I only wanted to work part-time to make a little bit extra money. So yeah, make sure you're looking for jobs that match the lifestyle you want to have. So not even just what's happening right now, like, what do you want? And then make sure you find something that aligns with that. I think that's
Yeah.
really, really good advice. Particularly, yeah, like what do you want to do? What do you not want to do? I always encourage my students, like, is there a job that you can do that's going to build your skill set towards the career that you want to have in the future?
Yep.
So like, can you do something beyond just flipping a burger? Because like, yes, unless you want to work in the culinary industry, that's great. But like, can we find a job that's going to maybe match us up with people or have us working with accountants or in graphic design or social media or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that we want to do in the future? Can you
Yeah.
build your skill set at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think the added perks that maybe come with that job. So like
Yeah.
sometimes students choose jobs because, hey, there's a great employee discount and I love shopping here.
Yeah.
Or some of them will do it because there's scholarships available. I always think that's a really savvy move on a high school student's part, is to line yourself up with a company who pays for part of college or has a scholarship program or something like that. So like,
Absolutely.
shout out to companies like Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Taco
Wegmans over
Bell.
here. Yeah, Taco Bell.
Yep.
I think Wendy's has one too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are companies that, it may not be the most exciting job in the world or line up with your career, but they will help you pay for college, which does line up with your career goals.
Yeah, and there's always a way to phrase a responsibility. Like, sure, you might just be flipping burgers, but there's customer service there too, and there's teamwork. You have to work with a team. There's always a way that you can flip what you say those responsibilities are to work in your favor. It's not just, oh, I handled the cashier. No, I communicated with guests and I handled their problems. I did problem solving. I did math. I was handling their finances. Like, there's always a way that you can make it work so that it's not just really basic responsibilities that you can use to show your skill set.
No, that's very true, guys. There is a way to rephrase everything that you're doing and put a good spin on it and say, like, these are skills that I learned. And when you're building your resumes, we talked to Bernadette Joy about building resumes, like make sure you're adding those things in and looking for the positive, looking for the things you have learned from your jobs as you do that. All
Mm-hmm.
right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to do our trivia for today. So I don't know if I explained this to you, Hannah, beforehand, but we do a trivia section every time we do one of these videos. I'm going to ask you all a question. You're going to put down your best guess without going over as to what you think the answer is. And there's a space on the back of your sheet to do that. Let's take a look. All right, so median salary for high school graduates in the US. Now that's based on 2024 data. So we don't have
Okay.
current data for 2025, but 2024 data. And normally I do it for like the national day. So it's May 19th we record this, but there's no actual interesting day, like national day for May 19th. So it's like, graduations are all around us. Let's just make it graduation day.
Yeah.
Do you have a number? Do you have a number in your head? Don't say it.
Okay, I have a number.
Okay, we will check in at the very end to see how close you all got and see how you compared to the rest of your class. All right, so Hannah, you talked about like knowing our worth and knowing before we go in, like, how much do I want to make? Because you said like, oh, let's check and see what the salary is. And in our head, we should be like, yes, that's enough, or no, it's not. Like, how do we figure
Mm-hmm.
out what is actually enough and how much we should be looking for in a part-time job?
Yeah. So it's important to understand the low end and the high end of a job. So what you want to try to do research on is, what does the most exceptional, most qualified worker in this role make? And then what is more of an entry level role? Somebody who doesn't have all the criteria but is starting. That'll give you the range from minimum to maximum. And that'll give you the information to know, I fall somewhere in between here. I'm either 100% exceptional and I meet all the criteria, I go above and beyond, and I should be making the maximum of this role. Or I'm at the lower end and I'm starting off. The way to find your spot in between this range is by doing market research. So my recommendation for market research, and all market research is figuring out how much you should be paid, what your market rate is. All you have to do is get about 3 to 5 different good sources of data. The data that I recommend you get comes from the internet, our favorite source, just Google search. And then there's in person, which I know the introverts listening are cringing, but I promise I have a really good way that you can get around any of the awkward in-person conversation. Starting just with the internet though, you're going to go to sources that exist that are really great, like that have been around for forever. Indeed, Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter. These are great sources that have data. But the important thing to keep in mind is they have aggregated data, meaning that if you go to Glassdoor and you search data analyst salary, they're going to give you one number that is an average of all the data that they have. Not 100% easy to compare yourself to the average, because what we need to figure out is what are those skills that make you at the top of the pyramid? What's the education needed to make the maximum salary, right? You're still going to use this information though, because it gives you a good little range to start off, those little plots on your chart. The most important data you can get though is from talking to people in person. So you can try to find a connection in person if you know anyone, but I recommend using LinkedIn and social media. LinkedIn is the best place to find any kind of worker with any job title around the world. And the best part is you can reach out to them directly. So you're going to find whoever works in the same job title that you want to work in. But even more, you want to try to whittle down those factors so that you compare yourself accurately. So if you can, try to find somebody with that job title in your location, or even better yet, in the industry that you want to work at. And then you're going to ask them, send them a message on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm interested in this role. I have applied for this job and I think I'm worth this, but I think I might be asking for too little. Can I have a conversation with you about how much you make and how you determined whether or not you were well compensated? That is the best way to open the door to the conversation. Tell them what your problem is and why you need to know how much they make. Don't send anybody a random DM and say, how much do you make? They will not respond. I'm probably the only person that can get away with asking that just point blank.
For
You need to
sure.
give them a reason. So reach out to people on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to people on TikTok and Instagram. There are people that are working full-time jobs that make content about their full-time jobs. I was a great example of this. Before I started this, I was making content about being a data analyst. And a lot of this content I made actually helped me figure out I was underpaid, because I had other people in the similar role reaching out to me and being like, I make more than you. Like, what are your qualifications? And sadly, like, that's how you find out, and you go down that rabbit hole and you learn more. But if you don't have the conversations and you just stick in your silo, it's really hard to figure out how much you're worth. So you're going to go to the internet, you're going to talk to people, you're going to gather all this information, and knowing what the minimum and max of the field, the range that you're looking for, you should be able to have enough information to figure out where you fall within that line based on these important factors like your years of experience, education, industry, location. Those are the top four that I would recommend you compare yourself on. But do not compare yourself to a totally random person in another state, in another industry, with different years of experience, with another job title. You're not going to get anywhere. Be very specific and don't be afraid to have those conversations.
No, that's it. Like talking to people, and that's advice I got from a very young age. And it was even like find people working in the company that you're applying to, and start the conversation with like, "Hey, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about applying for a job here. Like, what's it like to work here?"
Yeah.
And you might get a good opening there for like, what's the culture like? What can you expect? What are the positives? What are the negatives? And then maybe you could eventually go into like, what was your compensation when you started?
Mm-hmm.
Is there flexibility on that, or what do you know about it? And they might be willing to share. They might not, because some people I feel like are unwilling to spill the beans on what their own business does or their own company
Yeah.
does.
But that's
But
why it's important to share, why you're asking. At least in my experience, I've had the most success by talking about my mission and telling other people to similarly talk about the positions they're in. And you'd be surprised, like, the reason that pay transparency, I think, has become more normalized now is so many workers have experience with being underpaid or pay secrecy harming them or somebody else they know. So there's just a really big window of opportunity there to have the conversation, at least now more so than 2 or 3 years ago.
yeah, and there's, I guess, exceptions to this as well. Like I know as a teacher, there's you can just skip the line because you can go right to the company and say like they publish their salary scales.
Yep.
So like this is how much you will make as a first year teacher, and there's really no negotiating on the table because like that's what they have to pay everyone with your qualification level at your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you will find jobs like that too, like where maybe the website just says like this is what our hourly rate is, particularly for you part-time workers. They might be like, this is the hourly rate we pay our part-time workers. And then you at least have a number going in where like I can take that, I can leave it, I can try and negotiate on it, see what
Yeah.
happens.
Absolutely. And I should have added that if you don't know, if you work for the government or the state, if you are basically a government employee, a public sector employee, your pay is transparent. 100%. It's you can Google what anybody who works for the government makes, not their name, but their job title, and all that information is transparent. So if you want to know how much, teachers make, if you want to know how much people make in your state government, that is all available to you, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it is great to be able to see that. I remember that was nice for me as a teacher to look in and be like, okay, applying to different districts in this area. What are the pay rates for different counties? Because they all pay differently. And I could see, okay, this is how much I start at. This is what it would eventually become based on my years of experience. So I was able to at least make an informed decision about whether I want to be a teacher who gets paid X amount of dollars or not. And that's, at the end of the day, it's
Exactly.
your choice. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So what happens if we're in the job and we're already in that, you were
Mhm.
underpaid like you were, and you went to your boss and you said, I want a raise, and they said no. But
Yep.
how should we prepare ourselves to ask for that raise? Like, have you any tips for us that would probably go better, or do you think you could have done it better next time?
Absolutely. So, number one, I don't blame them so much for not giving me a raise because I had just started at the company. I was
Mhm.
about 6 months into this new role when I learned that I was underpaid. And it really goes to show why it's important to make sure you're well compensated going into the job, because I faced that issue where they looked at me and said, you just started. We're not giving you a $25,000 raise. You said yes 6 months ago. You can't change your mind now. Like, you accepted what we were going to pay you. That's fair in and of itself, but it does put you in a tight position if you find out, like I did, that you're undercompensated, where my only resolution was to go get another job. So, number one, make sure that you are accepting pay that you're okay with if you know it's lower than your market rate, but preferably pays you your market rate before you start. You should only be accepting good job offers, not low ball offers. Although the economy is very difficult right now, so if that's
Yeah.
what you get, there's no shame from me there. But if you are in your job and you have been there a year or two and you're getting ready to ask for a raise, the thing that you want to do is talk about it pretty frequently, which is very scary, especially having this conversation one time paralyzes people. But I tell you that you need to have it frequently, because if you wait until the end of the year for your end of year meeting with your manager, where you go over how the year went and everything, if you wait until then, it's too late. At the end of the year, a lot of companies have already made decisions on who's getting a raise and what the budget is for those raises. So you need to start going in your manager's ear about a raise at least 6 months before. Tell them, hey, can we have a conversation about my compensation? And just show them your market research. Tell them, what you've done your research on, what you expect to be compensated, what you hope the raise would be. And most companies will give you every year at least a 2 to 3% cost of living increase that you should expect. But if you want a good raise, I would say you should aim for about 5 to 10% total if you think you've done a really good job. So that would be a good amount to ask for. Just tell them, like, hey, I would like to ask for a raise at the end of the year. What do I need to do to meet the expectations at the end of the year to have this raise meet my wallet? And you're going to document everything, because that conversation you have 6 months before the raise is going to be the proof you have that you asked for it and that they gave you the steps that you need to meet to reach the raise. At the end of the year, hopefully you will have done everything that they set as an expectation, and you can tell them, hey, you remember this conversation 6 months ago, this email that we have, that I've logged? I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Where's my raise? It's that simple. You just want to ask, what do you need to do to get there? And then do it and document everything so that you can prove that you've done it, and also speak quantitatively. You want to try to talk about what impact you've done for the company through your role in ways that is numerical, because that's what they like to hear: an X% increase or an X% decrease or this much more. That is numbers that management sees as an improvement to bottom line, instead of if you're just talking about soft skills like my customer service is off the chain. Like, they're not going to see that as something to give you a raise for. But if you say My customer service was so exceptional that we decreased our line by 5% every Monday through Friday. That's just an example off the top of my head. That is a way to show that you proved your value.
Yeah, it's a hard conversation, and you make it a lot easier if you start it months in advance, even especially again when you go back to applying for that job and you're getting ready to accept your job offer. Be like, how often do we do performance evaluations where salary is up for negotiation? And
Yep.
you just make sure that there's a day in the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if every company does that. Like, I don't, does every company meet with their employees once a year to be like, let's evaluate your performance? Or do they just kind of like, until someone asks, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and see until
Yep.
someone kicks up about it?
That's a great question to ask in the job interview, like the first interview you have with a recruiter. When they ask you, what questions do you have for me? That is when you go right in and you say, what is the structure for pay raises at this company? Just like you said, you need to know what the expectations are for, will I get a raise? Is a cost of living promotion or raise included? Is it expected? Like you said, each company is different and they all have their own way of working.
Because like, let's say like we're going in for these minimum wage jobs, and I know most of our high schoolers are probably looking at us like I got nothing here. Like there's a line out the door of high school students willing to take this job, and they're all paying minimum wage. Like, am I going to have a leg to stand on to try and apply for more money or negotiate for more money if I'm doing a low skill job? That's basically what we're going to call these low skill jobs, where you don't require a ton of education. Almost anybody can do it as long as they're of working age. So what do we do in those situations?
That's very tough. Low skill jobs like that are the ones that I'm very happy have really embraced pay transparency. You can see like driving by like the Wendy's, they'll show the pay right outside, which is great. But it does really lean towards those low skill jobs. And what I have seen is they don't give you a range; they give you one number. They're like, yeah, this job pays $20 an hour, $15 an hour. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for negotiation. So I would say still ask. It's a really great opportunity for you to practice because a low skill job like that is also low risk. You're not. I would say if you can't get the job at Wendy's, you can still get the job at Chick-fil-A, right? Like there's endless fast food jobs. And if you get turned down from one, it's not the end of the world. Versus when you're really into your career, there's a lot of fear about asking for salary and raises because they're scared that the job offer will be turned down. That doesn't happen nearly as much as people think it does. It very rarely happens. But my point is, asking about pay and asking if there's any wiggle room in compensation for a raise lets you have the conversation early on with low risk, not as much pressure, and you just get more comfortable talking about pay in a professional setting. So I would recommend asking if there is any room for increases in compensation just to test it out, just to say the words and get it out of your mouth and start feeling more comfortable with the conversation. But if they come back and they say, no, the wage is set, take it or leave it, you can always ask about other benefits. And that's something you can do at all jobs. If the wage doesn't move, you can negotiate for so many other things. You can negotiate for your work-life balance. If you're working at this job, like at Wendy's, what are the hours? You can negotiate for a better schedule that meets what your lifestyle would require. You don't want to work nights? Okay, can I only work weekends? You can negotiate for that. You can also negotiate for a ton of benefits, especially in a standard salary job. You can negotiate your paid time off, how many vacation days you have. You can negotiate your health benefits. You can negotiate your commuting benefits. If you have to drive into the office, can they pay for your parking? Can they pay for if you have to take the Easy Pass? Can they pay for your gas? Those are all things you can ask for. You can even ask, I've seen some people ask for daycare and pet insurance recently. So if you have a pet, you can ask for pet insurance. You could even ask for compensation for pet care if you need to get a dog walker. All those things. If you have to pay for anything to do your job, that is something you can negotiate for.
Yeah, and it becomes this balance all of like the more valuable you can make yourself to a company, the more likely they are to work with you to keep you in those roles. And I've seen this with a lot of part-time workers who are my students. They work at the bottom, they start becoming, managers or shift managers, and they start becoming valuable to the company where the company
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily want to lose them. Like they're harder to replace.
Mm-hmm.
So asking like, well, what do I have to do to move up to become a leader in this position, a shift manager, something like that? And then when you do go to ask for more, you can be like, well, okay, like if I leave, you're going to have to replace me, and I'm not as easy to replace. There is not a line out the door to do this particular job,
Yep.
and you might not get the pay increase, but again, you might get the better benefits or hours or pathway to higher salary if you want. So don't be afraid to
Yeah.
ask for those things too.
Absolutely. And you should also feel empowered. It's important to know that if you leave a company, it is way more expensive for that company to hire you and hire your replacement than it is for them to give you the raise that you ask for. So if you're feeling nervous about asking for the raise and you need anything to give you some confidence, please know that you are valuable to the company and it's way more expensive for them to replace you than to give you what you know you're worth right now.
Yeah, so that whole process of like setting up interviews, paying somebody to sit in those interviews, go through applications, find somebody new, train them, like those all cost money. And as Hannah said, like it might just be cheaper to give you the 10% raise than it will be to go through all that hassle and extra cost too. So you never know.
Yeah.
You never
Yep.
know. And that's the thing, you only have to ask.
Yep.
And
And if you
I
don't ask, you won't get it.
no, and I feel like statistically, young people are less likely to ask. Um, Women are less likely to ask than men.
Yep.
And you talked about applying for jobs too, and like looking at the criteria of what they're looking for. Men are more likely to apply for a job where they don't meet most of the criteria, and they'll just take a shot on it. And women tend to wait for everything to line up before they apply because they're like, okay, I'm not going to get it if I'm not going to have
Hmm.
everything. And that's a gross generalization, I know, but make sure that's not you. Make sure
Yep.
like you're not waiting for somebody to hand you the job. You're not waiting for it to line up perfectly. You're like, let me throw my hat in the ring and see like if I can offer value to this company in a way that they're like, yeah, let me take you on. Let's take a shot on you. And your
Yeah.
age doesn't have to be a limiting factor. Some of you are very skilled in the things that you know how to do, and those are very valuable to other companies.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
saw a company hire a teen social media manager recently, and they're paying them $40 an hour to do it because like you can do graphics, you can do social media, and most adults are not able to do that in an engaging way. You've got a
Hmm.
valuable service to offer.
Absolutely. I echo that 1000%.
All right, so let's see. We're going to go into some student questions now, and then
Okay.
we'll come back and do the answer to our trivia before we get your number one piece of advice for
Okay.
teens. Because we got some really good questions here. Like Hannah and I could keep talking all day. I feel like there's so many avenues to go down, but you guys had some really
So
good
many.
questions. And
Hmm.
if you are watching the replay and you've got questions still and we don't answer them, put them in the comment section on the YouTube video. We'd love to get back in there and answer them for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We kind of talked about Andre's question already. So I'm a part-time student, can I negotiate salary? Probably not, right?
You can try,
Yeah.
but I recommend asking, try to get more comfortable hearing no, just say it because the more you say it, the more comfortable you'll get when it really matters. And I would say it doesn't matter as much in a part-time job, but it really matters in that full-time job that's paying you a salary. So practice it, just ask, hey, is there any wiggle room in this in the pay range listed? What expectations should I set for myself to get a raise? Just ask that, but if there is no wiggle room, try to see if you can negotiate any other benefit that you think would matter for the job.
And I would add in apply to multiple part-time jobs at the same time. Like you
Yep.
don't have to apply for one, wait for an answer before you apply to the next one. Apply to a bunch of them. Go do some interviews. I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten in terms of job interviews was just do interviews on a regular basis. Even if like you don't care about the job that much, if someone wants to interview you or you routinely apply for jobs, like go do it and practice. And then you can come back and be like, well, Wendy's is offering to pay me 15.50 an hour. You're offering 15.25. Can you match what they're offering? And
Hmm.
just see like if they'll take it or not.
Yeah. That was actually my number one piece of advice, and I'll think of another one for the end. But
Oh no, I
I,
ruined it.
I, no, I agree with that so much because my dad told me something that really changed the game for me when I was in college. I told him I was like, I got this interview, but I don't really care about the job. I don't really want it. Like, should I do it? And my dad told me, take every job interview you get, especially if you aren't invested in it, because I'm speaking especially to people who get nervous about job interviewing. The only way to get better at it is to do it more frequently. And the best way to start getting comfortable at it is when there's low pressure and low stakes. So, absolutely do all those job interviews that you don't care about, that you don't want, because it lets you practice how you respond to the questions, how you show up, and how comfortable you feel in the interview. And it'll pay off when it really matters.
And like just because you don't care about it doesn't mean you don't prep for it. Like you still
Yeah,
prep for the interview as if you wanted the job because that's what you want to practice. Because I've been on the interviewing side of things. When someone turns up and they clearly haven't done any research about the job and they're like, man, like it's like I don't care. Like I'll take this
it's
job. You're
just
like,
an
just
immediate no.
just out you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So show people that you care and go through the ability, go through the practice of like looking up a company, seeing what they're about, how would you fit into that role, practicing your interview questions that you want to ask your employer. So like
Mm-hmm.
about salary, a great one, the benefits and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when you get the ones you do care about, you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Makai asked this one. Is it rude to ask how much a job pays before I apply? So like, can
No.
I just go to the manager and be like, hey, like, how much does this job pay before I stick in an application?
No, absolutely not. And I understand why people feel this way and why they think this is the case because corporate America has done an excellent job at making us feel very greedy to be compensated for our work, which no work is free. No work that you should be doing should not be compensated. So it's a reframe, right? If you are doing work for somebody else, you should be compensated. And we should not be seen as greedy for asking what the compensation is in exchange for our labor. So it's really a mindset, but there are ways that you can go about asking this that will come across more professional versus quote unquote greedy and somebody saying, no, get out of my shop. I don't want you to work for me. All you care about is money. No, all you have to ask is, what is the compensation for this role? What does this role pay? You don't have to say like, how much can I expect? Or, say it in a way that you're only doing it for the compensation, but you can ask professionally, how much is the compensation for this role? If it makes you nervous to ask in person and you're worried about how that might come across, do it by email. You can always do things by email and just remove the face, remove any bias that might occur or fear of bias, but absolutely ask. You shouldn't be applying to any job unless you know what the compensation is, because imagine you put all that effort into your cover letter or the application and they pay $7 an hour. Like nobody's paying the bills on $7 an hour.
No. And yeah, if you're nervous about like, what do I say or how do I draft that kind of email, this is a great use of things like AI, where you're like, okay,
Yeah.
ChatGPT, help me out here. I need to draft a letter to a hiring manager. And I want to ask in a non-greedy way, like how much they pay. And they'll help you. And then you tweak it and then you send it. Or you can even use it to help you prep the questions you're going to ask in your interview.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't sure how friendly we were for ChatGPT, but
I I am all
it's a
for
great
things that
resource.
make our life easier, better, and are used in a responsible way. So I
Absolutely.
I use ChatGPT almost daily, but it never replaces me. It enhances me.
Yeah, this is a great use of it. Ask it, how do I ask this job what the compensation is in a professional way? It'll give you the answer.
All right, Dylan had a really good question. Let's say like I went in, I didn't do that work beforehand, but someone asked me like, well, how much do you want to be paid? Like I wasn't expecting this. You're asking me how much I want to be paid? Like nobody expects that question, yet it gets asked all the time. What would you say
Yep.
to that?
So, number one, you should be going to every job interview knowing what you should be expecting to make, knowing what your market research is, what your market rate is. So, don't make that mistake. Definitely come prepared to every single interview, because if they ask you, then you are kind of deer in headlights and you don't know what to say. And you might end up saying a lot less than what you should be making. So, number one, don't make that mistake. But if you do find yourself in that predicament, this is my tip. It was also going to be my piece of advice at the end, but I'll have another. So my piece of advice here is, it's actually how I ended up finding my market rate when I found out I was underpaid 90 and I got a 25K raise, making 115K at the next job. In my interview, I came prepared with my market rate, but she asked me, my recruiter, she asked me, what is your expected compensation for this role? And I actually flipped it on her. I asked her instead, I said, I have a good estimate for how much I think I should be making, but would you mind sharing the budget with me for the role? And that is a perfect way to flip it on them and put the ball back in their court and say, I know what I should be making, but how much are you guys expecting to pay? And some companies will not give you the answer that you're looking for. They'll spit it right back at you. But in my case, this company actually told me that the budget was 115K. And why that mattered so much was, I knew that I should have been making 115K, but I was also nervous to ask for what I was worth. And I had prepared myself to ask for 105. If she hadn't given me the budget of 115K, I would have underpaid myself by 10K right then and there. And do you think she was going to tell me that there was 10K on the table that I just missed out on? Absolutely not. So I recommend asking for the budget no matter what. Never tell them. I mean, I don't say never, but it's good practice to make them tell you what the range is or what the expected pay rate is instead of you giving out the number that you expect. Do everything you can to make them say it first.
And yeah, if you get that scenario where like they're just not budging on it, you have to give them a number. Are you familiar with Chris Voss and his
Yeah.
book? So
Yep.
Chris Voss has a book called Never Split the Difference, and I love this book. It's
Great
one of my
book.
highest recommended ones. But his advice in that scenario would be you give them a range, and your low number is the number that you actually want. So
Yep.
like in your case, you'd be like, you know what, my range is about 125 to 150K is what I'm expecting. And what that does is it anchors the person to the high number. So it's like, oh, 150K, it's a lot of money. I'll get them at 125. Like that way I'm getting them
But
at the
that's
bottom.
your
I'm
high
gonna
rate.
win. Yeah. And you're like in your head, you're like, that's what I wanted to walk out with anyway. If you give
Yep.
me anything more than that, I'm dancing my way out of here. So
Yep.
give them a range where the low number is what you actually want, not like 10K below what you want, like the actual number you want, and then give them a number higher than that as the high end. That way, if they're within their range or if they're within your range, they think they're doing a good job. They've got you in your range and they're hopefully staying inside their budget range and you both feel like you won. And that was one of the most key parts of negotiation, according to this book, was like, make sure both sides feel like they've won.
Absolutely. Yeah, we just interviewed a financial analyst in New York who had the exact same negotiation advice, and it worked for him. He got a lot more money.
And it's something to try.
Yeah.
You can always they can always come back and be like, oh well, that's like outside of our budget. Here's what we're actually paying, and you can
Yeah.
then decide informed whether you're going to take it or leave it. And that's the thing. You want to be an informed decision maker. It's what a lot of personal finance is about.
Yep.
Okay, Jewel had a good question, and we talked about this a little bit, but what is the best job for someone my age? And Jewel, I'm going to assume is high school teenager, so maybe 15 to 18 years old. What would you say, like, best job you can think of for a 15 to 18-year-old? Because I've got one in my head too.
Customer service off the top of my head is what I would recommend everybody do. I think every single working adult and working American or American in general should have a customer service job because it just teaches you how to respect people and also what the job entails and how difficult it is that you don't see from the outside. So I think that's a good one just to have the life experience knowing you did it. But in terms of compensation and good pay, which is another thing that I like to lean towards, I would say any type of service job is a huge money maker. And that can be yard work. It can be helping people with their pets. It can be helping people with their children. Daycare and nannying is a really popular job right now, like babysitting. But I'm seeing some teenagers who are doing lawn work in their neighborhood and getting really valuable business experience, but also making a good amount of money. I would also say social media is a good source, but not if you're under 18. Definitely try to find it afterwards. But yeah, there's a lot out there. There's all kinds of jobs. Also swimming, like swim instructor, lifeguard, those pay very, very well. I interviewed a Red Cross swim instructor in New York recently, and he made, I want to say, between $100 to $140 an hour teaching these courses and just teaching people these life-saving skills. So not only do you gain a really important skill in society and contribute to society in that way, you can make a lot of money teaching other people too.
Yeah, and anything that you have to be even somewhat qualified to do is going to come with a better pay bump because now you've reduced the number of people who are applying for this job. So my two would be probably a sports official. So
That's a
like
good one.
from a very young age, you have kids playing organized sports and they need officials for those games. And I think I'm an official for girls lacrosse and I make $1.15 a minute when I do tournaments.
Nice.
Yeah. So like, you multiply that by an hour, like we're over $60 an hour easily.
Yeah.
And like some of these tournaments, you might do 10 to 15 games over a weekend. Like you
Wow.
can walk out with $1,000 in a weekend and it's open to teens because you just have to
Hmm.
be one age bracket over the kids that you're reffing. So start
Yeah.
with young kids, you'll get paid well, you'll move up through the ranks and it matches your schedule really well. Because like when
Hmm.
you're reffing high school sports when you're in college or you're reffing young kids at the weekend, they're always doing it when you're not in school. So like
Right.
it's a great one for compensation and time.
There's also a
Um,
shortage of sports officials
yes.
nationwide. So definitely a lot of jobs out there.
And that is another good one for like customer service. Like you have to learn to manage people And
Parents.
you will learn the hard way in a lot of cases, but it is a great one for learning to manage people.
Yeah.
The other one would be lifeguard. That was in my head too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, minor qualification to get it. Almost anybody can get it as a teen, and
Mm-hmm.
then you reduce the pool of applicants, pun intended, I suppose. And you can work at pools in your local area. You can work as a swim instructor, as you said. So yeah, you get to kind of demand your own salary. And then
Yeah.
tutoring is another great one too that you didn't mention. Where like
Tutoring.
if you're an expert in any particular topic in your school, somebody else will pay you for that expertise to help them figure it out. Um, so,
Absolutely.
so go a level down from you, go an age down from you. You can tutor your peers if you want. That's usually a harder sell. Not everyone wants to be tutored by a direct peer, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly like if you're in geometry, go tutor algebra 1. If you're in algebra
Yeah.
1, go tutor 8th grade math. Like you can certainly do that.
Yeah, and you can charge $20 an hour, $30 an hour. I've seen people charge 40 to $100 an hour, depending on what they're tutoring. So you can make a
Yep.
lot more than a fast food job.
Yep. SAT tutoring, really lucrative because people are taking that to help them pay for college. So like the
Yep.
payout is great if they can get those scores up. So if you're good at that stuff, find what you're good at. Can you tutor in it? Can you help in it? Can you find a job that needs that particular skill? That's how you're going to make more per hour, or get the experience that you really want.
Yep.
All right. Let me see. Is there any other ones? Oh, we got the opposite now.
Ooh.
What careers do you feel are
Ooh.
not worth it? Now, this is careers. So we're not just talking about teen jobs, but like, yeah, what careers are like, that from what I've seen, not really a
Mm-hmm.
great choice.
So I want to preface by saying that my list is entirely in regards to pay, like low pay for a lot of investment, expensive investment, not at all in terms of how important the job is. And I want to say that because you'll see a trend. But based on who I've interviewed, and I've interviewed well over 1,000 strangers nationwide now in a variety of different industries and career fields, a sad trend has definitely shown up that the roles in our society that I would deem, at least, are the most important. And I'm speaking about teachers, social workers, bus drivers, nurses, EMTs, paramedics. A lot of those jobs do not pay well. I actually just put out an EMT, paramedic, first responder compilation today, and the range of pay from all the people within the compilation went from $15 an hour to it topped out at $60,000 a year. And these are people who have bachelor's degrees. They have these certificates. They have these skill sets to save lives, to deliver babies. It's very important, very complex work, and they are just not well compensated. Social workers have graduate degrees and PhDs, and they're making less than $60,000 a year in high cost of living areas as well. And then teachers, sadly, I've seen really well paid teachers in, thankfully, the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia. These counties really invest in their teachers. And there's a reason that our schools are so high in terms of compared to the rest of the country. And the intelligence of our students is a direct reflection of how we value our teachers. But unfortunately, when you see low test scores in Mississippi and Nashville and, lower states like that, it is a reflection as well of how we invest in the teachers, and those teachers are not well compensated. I interviewed a teacher in Indianapolis who was striking and she had a master's degree, and I think she made $60,000 a year after 40 years of experience. Like, she was about to retire. So all this to say, it's really important that we have these workers. We want people to be in those roles. And luckily, we have seen trends towards them being higher compensated. And that's related to unions and those workers unionizing and demanding more. So I know we talked about voting earlier, but also support for unions is such an important thing in terms of making sure people are well compensated and that these roles don't disappear. But all that to say, please don't feel discouraged to go into those careers. There are ways that you can make more based on your location, based on your skill set. If you want to go higher up, in terms of education, you can earn more in certain locations. But it is a sad trend that I have seen compared to, software engineers in Silicon Valley making $600,000 a year total compensation. But, that's related to capitalism. When you are, within a private company that has no limit to how much they can make and what their profit margins are, they're able to invest more into this talent. But when you have workers that work for the government and they're being paid by taxpayer dollars, there is not this huge, pool that capitalism can pull from. So it's important to understand what those differences mean in terms of compensation, but not to get discouraged because they are such important roles that we need.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. Like as a teacher, yes, I feel like I could be compensated more, but I also feel like there is so much more to the job that we want to consider besides just salary. And you prefaced with that as well. Like there are the value you feel from what you do. There's also the lifestyle that comes with it. So like teachers, we do have a better lifestyle than someone who has to work from 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening or 6 in the evening. And you have to balance that. Like how important is your salary to you compared to how much you work or what the benefits are that come with that or how many days off you have. So make sure you are figuring out what is important to you and you're finding the careers that line up with that. And if salary is the most important thing, then make sure you find a career where you're going to be really well compensated for what you do because you're giving up a very valuable asset, and that's your time, your energy, and your expertise.
Absolutely.
All right, let's find out the answer to our trivia, and then we'll get your number one tip that we've spoiled at least 3 times by now.
No worries.
So how'd you do?
Way more than I thought. I was going to say like 25,000. I was so surprised.
I'm not sure. Are they just like, is it anybody who's graduated high school? So that includes our college graduates, or is that just someone with the highest level of education as high school? It wasn't clear when I looked that up, but that was from Bureau of Labor Statistics. So like it's
Love it.
a source where they're collecting people's salary and they're publishing it. So yeah, it's 46,000 with a high school degree. So hopefully that's not a lot of money in a lot of states, but it is a lot of money in other states. So it just depends on where you live.
Yeah. And it also really depends on it's way harder to make ends meet if you go it alone. And I'm not saying, go couple up with anybody quickly, but there is a lot to be so much value in roommates and working with friends, to split expenses. And if you have, a significant other and you want to cozy up, you can split rent. But there's ways to make it work that 40K can get you where you need to go. You just have to be creative.
Was that your tip, or do we need to still ask you your tip?
I'll say my tip. So really quick, just really straightforward. I've said a bunch earlier. So the one that I can think of really is to talk about compensation, to talk about your pay. If there's anything you take from this conversation, it's the importance of pay transparency. You don't have to share it with anybody, a random stranger who wants to put you on social media on their channel like me. It's not important to say it there. What matters is to say it in the rooms that matter. And the rooms that matter are with other colleagues who are not sure if they're well compensated at the same company, with people who come into your LinkedIn DMs and ask, am I being paid fairly? Can I talk to you about it? And especially with your friends and your family at the dinner table, if they are having conversations about pay and not feeling like they're well valued, that is when it's really important to speak up and share your 2 cents and find a way to meet in the middle. More often than not, these conversations are not negative. They don't go, to hands and fists. They are very collaborative and you learn so much. There's always something that you can learn from somebody else about their compensation. So I just recommend that you have the conversations and embrace the transparency.
It's a wonderful tip. You got a good one.
Thanks.
There's so many in this one. Okay. Let's try and wrap this up so we can keep it around an hour. But Hannah, where can we find you if we want to learn more and we want to see more of the videos that you're making?
Absolutely. And thank you so much again for having me. This was a lot of fun. If you want to follow Salary Transparency, we are on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it, at Salary Transparency. And if you want to go to our website, salarytransparency.com, we built it for workers, by workers. It's 100% free and it's filled with a salary database. So you can look up any job title and this is what we did. We fixed the problem with Glassdoor. We actually built a database that gives you those factors like location, years of experience, company, industry, so you can compare yourself really accurately, not just to an aggregated data point. So use our salary database to make sure you're well compensated. You can search jobs in our job board. We only list jobs that show the pay transparency. So if you want that, and then we have a ton of resources. We have a pay transparency law tracker, so you can keep up to date with what your state's pay transparency laws are, and salary negotiation guide, free scripts. If you don't know what to say, we have a bunch of stuff that can help you.
That's a lot. I hope you guys check that out. I hope you took something from this, particularly as you go into the world now and apply for those first jobs, apply for your part-time jobs, reevaluate the job you're currently in. There's a lot of strategies in here. Make sure you go find those and use them. Hannah, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, and wishing you all the best and good compensation.
See you all soon.